Hello, brothers and sisters. It's your boy BC. Welcome back to another Based LDS video. And this is probably my 10th attempt at recording this. Will be my final attempt at making a video on the first vision. Before I start this, I would like to give a very humble thank you to those of you out there who watched the Praise to the Man video I put together and put out on Saturday. That was intended to be the kickoff video to the series of videos I'm going to do on the Prophet Joseph Smith. I did not think I would ever see a response like that. I am humbled that so many of you liked it, that so many people watched it, and that so many people thought enough of it to subscribe to this channel. Thank you. I love the prophet. I love the prophet Joseph Smith. I love what he's done in acting as a witness for Jesus Christ. Everything you could think of that a prophet should do and should be, he did and was. And I really hope that these videos I make stand as a tribute to him and a testament to my faith and gratitude in the Savior for calling someone like Joseph Smith to be a prophet. So, I am starting this video in this series with the first vision because I do believe that outside of what Elder McConkie referred to as the three great pillars, creation, fall, and atonement, that the first vision, outside of those three again, the first vision is the single most important moment in time, in history. The first vision was the kickoff to the opening of the last dispensation. The first vision reintroduced God to the world as someone who knows us and will get directly involved in our affairs. The keys to the priesthood restored. The gathering of Israel recommenced. Temple work recommenced. The true meaning of salvation and exaltation reintroduced. And all done with an eye to saving all of humanity and not just the people in a certain given time and place. So let's start off if there's one testimony that I wish everyone could hear, it is that of Truman G. Madsen. Some of you, most of you out there are probably well aware that he did a fantastic series on the life of Joseph Smith. 8 lectures. Actually, he did 2 series, 16 lectures. But the first and most well known, he covered the first vision in the first lecture. And that is just the most amazing testimony I have ever heard. Now, there is a channel on YouTube. I don't know if it exists on Rumble, but there's a channel on YouTube called Rough Stone Rolling. And I've talked about that to some of you out there as far as the Nibley Volume 3, The World and the Prophets. You know that Nibley's lectures are on that channel, but there's also a Truman G. Madsen lectures on the Prophet Joseph Smith on that channel. And his testimony of the first vision is incomparable. It still inspires me to this day. And I really hope that many of you will go and give that a watch. Or if you have the book or the CDs, you'll break those out again and listen to them. Read them. It's fascinating, it's awe-inspiring, and it's spirit rich and filled. So there's that little plug for a little channel called Rough Stone Rolling and the Truman Madsen series on Joseph Smith there. They also cover other things, but that's the first lecture of 8. So today, we're going to start off by talking about what I feel is the most confusing take on the prophet Joseph Smith's vision, and that is, if he's a prophet, why does he have 4 different versions of the first vision? This is the thing that the CES letters try and hit us over the head with. These are the things that people in anti-Mormon tracts try and hit us with. If Joseph Smith saw God, why did he give so many different versions of it? And let me say this, there are 4 first-hand accounts, either written by or authorized by the prophet Joseph Smith. Then there are 5 second-hand accounts where they say, I heard the prophet say this, and then they write what they heard him say. For this first video, let's just talk for just a few minutes about this issue of multiple versions. Let's go real quick. Anybody that wants to read all 4 versions, the church does not hide them. They're out plain for anyone to see. And if you weren't aware of 4 versions, that's okay. It's just fine. The 3rd version is the one that we currently contain in our Pearl of Great Price. It's the most well-known. It's the one that when I was a missionary and we talked about the first vision, we used that version of the appearance of God the Father and his Son Jesus Christ to the prophet. So you come here to josephsmithpapers.org, just a regular website, no paywall, no anything, no subscription. See, it brings up the Joseph Smith Papers. And right here on the front page that you get to when you type it in up in your search bar, go to Feature Topics, and you see the 4th version, the 4th link there, Accounts of Joseph Smith's First Vision. Click on that, and then it brings you to clickable links. I'll bring one up here for you to see, where you see what was handwritten in a journal or church history, and again, handwritten, and then you see the entry of that on PDF or whatever this is on their website. So for those of you that can't read this script over here on the left, but that's the page from the journal or history of the church entry, and this is it being typed up and printed for all to see. Okay? And it's like this for all 4 versions. You can see the original manuscript they pulled it from. Now, the first of those was in the first published Joseph Smith history, which was published in the summer of 1832. And he wrote it, Joseph Smith kicked off the Joseph Smith history with 3 pages where he talks about how the first vision came about. The second one is from his journal as a result of a discussion to a visitor that he had with a visitor to his home. And there's a lot said about this guy who came to visit Joseph, what his intentions were. But either way, this is Joseph Smith writing down about his experience with this person, Joshua the Jew, or Matthias, or Matthew the prophet. I don't remember what they called him under Matthew, but it is his version of the conversation he had and his testimony, his bearing testimony to the first vision. And then you see here that there's a second version of the second version, where a man named Warren Parrish repurposed the journal for inclusion in a history and included a lightly edited copy of this same account. for in 1835 for pages 120 to 121 of a Joseph Smith history from 1834 to 1835. So this is someone going, okay, Joseph wrote this. Now I'm going to write my version of it. So he's not saying, Joseph told me this. He's saying, I saw this. Here's what Joseph Smith had. And he's rewriting the account. But it's in his words. Then you get the third, and again, official version. And this version is from the Joseph Smith history in our Pearl of Great Price. So this third version, there are a couple drafts of it because this is being written for publication in an official church history. There are a couple drafts where he writes it down, then goes through and revises. Writes it down and revises. And then there's a Howard Corey that begins making edited copies of this history. But he discontinues this after 100 pages. It's all the history, not just the first vision. Certain portions do vary, it says here. Some portions of this copy vary from the original, but they're very much identical to the source. And then in 1841, the same man, Howard Corey, creates what's called a fair copy. So the Joseph Smith history version was completed in 1838 and published. Corey made a fair copy. And a fair copy is just a faithful reproduction from a finished product. So this is where Corey goes, hey, this is what I'm reading. This is what I read. I'm telling you what I read. So it's his view of what Joseph Smith said. But it's faithful to what Joseph wrote. But it's his words that you're getting here. And then the fourth one is another Joseph Smith history published in the Times and Seasons. So this was a version that Joseph Smith had printed in the Times and Seasons in 1842. Volume 3, pages 706, 707. And that an updated version of that history was prepared in 1844. That was supposed to be a word-for-word copy of 1842. And again, you can go through and click on all of these and open them up just the way I did here. See? 1832. Joseph Smith Journal, 1835 to 36. And then, like I said, in some cases there were other versions, additional versions. Letter Relations to Jeremy Whitlock, Revelation 16, Minutes and Prayer of Dedication. So if there's a version taken from this account somewhere, you can read that version of that account, which is fantastic. And like the one I told you, the Joseph Smith history, draft 2. Like I said, look at this. History circa June 1839, history circa 1841 draft. And this is the fair copy draft. So you can go through and read each of the different variations of the first vision. Now, I'm not going to read through all of these. That would take a very long time. But you're going to find 80% of everything really very nicely correlates one version to another. But you will find some information that is unique to each one. So let me go back, and when I talk about the versions, and again, let's remember, Joseph Smith has been telling this, testifying to what he saw since he had the vision in 1820. So the first written in Joseph Smith's handwriting version is summer of 1832. And the next 3 full versions, the last is March 1842. 10 years. 10 years. 4 accounts over 10 years. One's his journal, an experience with a visitor. One is a history, the history of Joseph Smith that he's having printed. The other, the history of the church. The other, a church history, but this time dedicated to the saints for publication in times and seasons. Sorry, my daughter came up looking for tweezers. I got interrupted and I don't know where I left off. I think we were talking about 80% similar, 20% different. And here's where you get some of the differences. The first one, Joseph Smith's giving you his history. He's talking to the most personal and in his own handwriting account. It's here that he makes a note and nowhere else that the idea for the welfare of his soul is something he first began to seriously consider when he was 12. And that it was by the time he was 15 that he would go into a grove to pray. It is here. He says scriptures pointed me to asking God, but really it was the majesty of the heavens, the orderliness, and the laws that kept the sun, the moon, and the stars moving in their appointed times and places. And that if there was such order in the heavens, how could there be such disorder and chaos here as far as religion was concerned? Because he thought if there was a church of God, it would be one that was orderly, well regulated. You don't really get that idea from the other three versions. So that's where it's very different. In all versions, he talks about a light, a fire coming down on him. I believe it's in this version where he talks about really thought the fire was going to light the forest, but nothing was consumed. I believe that's the first version. I could be wrong. Maybe it was the second one, but I believe it was the first one. Here, and this is where he states most strongly that he's very concerned for the welfare of his soul and that he is convicted by his sins. That's common talk for the 1800s, early 1900s, when it comes to religious anxiety. Here, he only mentions seeing Christ. And that he's forgiven of his sins. Now, that forgiveness also appears in all four versions. But in certain versions, he gets into more detail about not joining any of the other churches than in other versions. But in all, it's the same. Do not join them because of their creeds and their false doctrines. That's consistent in all four versions. And I want to say this. There is nowhere in any of Joseph Smith's accounts where he says that the preachers are abominable or abominations. He does not say that their practices are evil and that they're doing wicked. But it is the abominations and the doctrines that are wicked. I hope I said that right. I'm tired. And on that note, I would just like to say, and this ties into President Nelson's talk about contention. We should be careful how we look at and judge other mainstream Christian religions. The people that practice those faiths are continuing the traditions for 2,000 years of Christianity. Those traditions have evolved over time. And I believe with noble intent. We all know as LDS people from reading the scriptures that there was going to be an apostasy that would take place. A loss of faith, a loss of revelation, a loss of prophecy. When that happens, people try to fill voids to make things make sense. I am thankful to the early church fathers who held the church together when the lights went out. It may have been a shadow of what was formerly there, but there was still something there. They safeguarded the scripture, and they kept some form of the church going so that people might become aware of Jesus Christ and that there might be a foothold 2,000 years later when the gospel could more fully be proclaimed to a freer world. We really need to be aware of how barbaric and cold and dark the world was when Christianity entered into it 2,000 years ago. We need to be grateful. Yes, just as anything within any country's history or past, yes, there are things that the ancient church, the Catholic Church, others have done wrong. No one's perfect. But they tried. And for the most part, they succeeded. So do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Do not point your fingers, laugh and scorn and say, well, you lost fools. And we need to pray for these people that their hearts and minds will be opened, that their hearts and minds will be softened towards the gospel. And they'll accept it, if not in this life, then in the next. So again, the Lord condemned the abominational creeds, but never the people. And I want to point one other thing out. We have a habit of saying, well, Joseph Smith had the first vision, and because of that he was called as a prophet, and that's just not so. Now, he was later told, because of his encounter with Heavenly Father, that weighed on him, that left an impression on him, and he continued to consider the welfare of his soul for years. And it was in 1823, 3 years after the first vision, that he saw Moroni, and then he was called to a work. So we don't want to say that Joseph Smith was called as a prophet at the age of 15. He had an experience that would lead him to have faith in a greater way than anyone else had had to that point, to where he would see the Father and make himself available to be of service to the Lord. But he was not a prophet right then and there, though he had a more sure testimony and ability to testify. So brothers and sisters, we will be getting a bit more into the first vision. But don't be surprised by 4 versions. Don't let slight differences throw you. And have a little grace and a little patience with an imperfect man who did the best he could to convey his story. I'm going to point to one other thing here. So there are 4 versions of Joseph Smith's account of the first vision that he either wrote or authorized. And then there are 5 versions from other people's accounts. Orson Pratt wrote a tract detailing Joseph Smith's first vision, but it was written by Pratt and published as a pamphlet in Scotland in 1840. So basically he says, here's the testimony as Joseph Smith told it to me. Orson Hyde, for a German publication, also a member of the 12, in 1842, published an account of Joseph Smith's earliest first vision. And I guess he was relying on Orson Pratt's version of an interesting account, the first one we talked about. Levi Richards, from his journal on June 11th, 1843, records Joseph Smith speaking of the first vision. And again, this is one where the audience, who's listening, comes into account. The fourth one is an interview with Joseph Smith by David Nye White for a book, The Prairies, Joe Smith, the Temple, the Mormons, etc., for the Pittsburgh Weekly Gazette, 15th of September, 1843. So this is an interview he's doing for a news article on Joseph Smith. And so he's detailing this for an article. And then somebody else goes through and goes, well, here's what Joe Smith told me, and types it out. Like a news article today. And then another journal, Alexander Neibauer, heard him relate the circumstances of the first vision. And he recorded in his journal on May 1844, just a couple months before the prophet would be assassinated. These 5 official secondhand accounts correlate remarkably well to the 4 official accounts. And what's important when it comes to an account? Consistency in detail and the presence of the Spirit. Brothers and sisters, the first vision is not an argument. It's not a theological discussion. It is testimony, pure and simple. The prophet is relaying his experience with God and then leaving it up to us to seek, to understand, and comprehend, and to know by the power of the Spirit. That's the power and importance of prophets. That's what separates a prophet from a philosopher or doctor, a learned man. As we study these things, we study them through the lens of faith. I know the Church of Jesus Christ is restored on earth, and the prophet Joseph Smith was called of God to open a dispensation and restore the gospel to the earth. I hope you'll continue to watch these videos and to journey with me to discover more about the prophet Joseph Smith, about his call as a prophet, and about his life, which he lived that we might be pointed to Christ. Because that's what prophets do. They point us to Christ. We do not worship prophets, but we do respect them. We do honor them. Just as Christ honored prophets and respected prophets. So, brothers and sisters, that's it. That's it for this video. I hope you'll come back for the second video, where we'll talk a little bit more about each version independently. And then after that, we'll talk about the doctrines that can be learned from the first vision. Because there are some things we take for granted that just aren't so, and there's some things we might not think of. And I hope you will all leave comments. Leave your testimonies. Let others know how you feel about the prophet. Let's share. Let's be a community of believers. And let's show the world who we are and what we believe in, as we're based in the gospel. That's it. Thank you for listening. Peace out.